Tonight on the docket. It began with a Rutgers University student leaping to his death in 2010. Now the case that may redefine cyberbullying in the U.S. comes to an end. 3 weeks and over 30 witnesses. What will a jury decide about Darun Ravi and his webcam spy game with his roommate Tyler Clementi? Was it a hate crime or just a college prank? And where does free speech in the social media age cross the line to become a crime? We're taking a look at all that tonight. Then, down to the wire, Florida's legislative session ends with $70 billion budget, a new university, and some controversial new laws now on Governor Rick Scott's desk. One in particular is raising some eyebrows over the death penalty and traffic pursuit cases. Is it taking an eye for an eye to a whole new level? It's 5 p.m. and it's Wednesday, March 14th, 2012, right here on the docket, so let's get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Felix Vega, and welcome to On the Docket. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We're glad to be back on the air, finally, and broadcasting from our brand new broadcast center live in Ybor City at Hawk Radio and Hillsborough Community College. It's our new HD facility that we're very excited about to have here and waited a long time to have in place. We've got a lot to get to tonight. As I mentioned, some of our top stories and some of the topics we're talking about, and we're also talking presidential politics. The primary season rolls on for the Republicans. We've watched them all come and go. Michelle Bachmann, Herman Cain, John Huntsman, Rick Perry. It's a different kind of Final Four than most of us are thinking about. An admittedly fractured field of candidates has shifted gears on any number of topics over the past month. From gay marriage to contraception to thumbing your nose at a college education, the economy. Are these the real issues Republican voters are focused on? Or when you filter out all the rhetoric, is the one uniting message simply beating President Obama? We have the delegate count, and we go inside the numbers later tonight. And we're adding a new segment to our show tonight, our On the Docket file drawer. We're going inside the case files of stories around the world that everyone should be talking about. From voter ID laws that ruled unconstitutional, Jerry Sandusky's legal team trying to figure out what evidence prosecutors have against him, and also a tribute to journalist Marie Colvin, killed in Syria. Does her death raise any new concerns about wartime reporting, or is it still part of the job that we all love? Finally, you want to stick around for our weekly recap of some bizarre legal stories. We've got some good ones for you again tonight from across the country and around the world in this week's installment of You Can't Make This Stuff Up. But first, we want to get caught up on today's top stories on the docket. We head first to New Jersey tonight and the latest on the Tyler Clementi case. The fate of 19-year-old Rutgers student Darun Ravi is now in the hands of a 12-person New Jersey jury tonight. Prosecutors and Ravi's defense attorney gave their closing arguments yesterday in a case that has turned a huge spotlight on the cyberbullying epidemic across the country. Ravi was charged with 15 counts of spying on his then roommate, Tyler Clementi, in September of 2010. Then altering Facebook and Twitter messages after Clementi jumped to his death off the George Washington Bridge in New Jersey. Prosecutors presented a case of bias intimidation against Ravi, alleging his actions in spying on Clementi were all done because Clementi was gay. Ravi's attorneys argued throughout the trial and through witness testimony that it was a practical joke gone wrong, that he was just a college student who didn't know any better. They also argued that Ravi didn't have a problem with Clementi's sexuality, but instead feared for Clementi's safety as he watched Tyler Clementi's sexual encounter on his webcam with an older male in their dorm room. That previously unidentified male testified in the trial, his identity concealed to the press and the public for his own safety. The case has gained national attention because of the number of teens that have committed suicide in the past year as a direct result of being bullied on social media sites. Legislators in New Jersey and New York have worked hard to introduce new laws that would criminalize cyberbullying, and there are the so-called cyberbullies accountable if the target of their bullying commits suicide. I'll have more on those efforts in our op-ed segment in just a few minutes. Here in Tampa, another court drama came to a close on Monday. Former Hillsborough County Commissioner Kevin White was sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release or probation. As we reported in November on the docket, damning video evidence introduced at a federal trial showed White receiving bribes that his lawyers tried to say were campaign contributions. White and his legal team also argued that his father, who died before the trial, was the true criminal in the case. A jury convicted White of bribery and wire fraud charges in November. White was still allowed to walk out of the courthouse Monday, pending a turn-in date that is still not set. Overseas now to a horrifying story that broke over the weekend in Afghanistan. An American soldier accused of an unimaginable killing spree Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has released little information about the soldier himself other than he has served 3 tours of duty in Iraq and was recently redeployed to Kandahar 6 weeks ago. The reports from witnesses are chilling and sobering. They described the soldier allegedly opened fire on an entire Afghan village in Kabul, not in a spree killing, but what appears to be a 48-hour rampage. Some of the witness accounts from those in that rural village outside Kandahar described the soldier went into people's homes, took up attack positions, often in a building-clearing manner, shooting Afghan citizens in an execution-style manner as well. If that wasn't enough, that same soldier was reportedly observed burning the corpses of those that he had killed. Among the dead, 9 children, 3 women, and one chilling account by a young boy who watched his own father get killed in the massacre. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, at a United Nations press conference on Monday, promised accountability for what had happened. Also, Secretary Panetta also stated that the death penalty would be strongly considered, as charges are expected to be filed in a U.S. military court sometime this week. The political recoil aside, the real fallout from the latest incident in Afghanistan falls once again on U.S. ground troops. Also in the Mideast, Syria is not backing down. Former UN Secretary Kofi Annan was in Syria this weekend in a last-ditch attempt to broker a peace deal between President Bashar al-Assad and opposition forces within the country. Not surprisingly, the opposition was leery of any meeting with al-Assad's people as the outright slaughter of Syrian civilians continued unchecked for another deadly week. For weeks now, video of the assaults in homes and other neighborhoods has been broadcast on the networks, and now chilling and graphic new photos of the children killed in those assaults has surfaced on Facebook, of all places. More graphic than any crime scene or autopsy photos you could ever expect to see in an American courtroom. Over 7,500 people have died in Syria since the uprising began. The international community and the Arab League are at a crossroads now as they debate the next step to take down Assad's regime. But new reports surfaced this weekend that show Assad is regrouping with his top officials and digging in for the time being. As I had some time off this month, I had time to work on the rundown for our show. I created the show on a model of bringing a new brand of journalism to news radio, a broader cross-section of the world's stories from a legal perspective, and still make our broadcast fun and informative. I also wanted to start separating out some of the stories and give them the time and attention they deserve in different ways. That brings us to the first of our top stories op-ed segment tonight. As you heard at the top of the broadcast, the Tyler Clementi case has broke ground regardless of the verdict and any sentence Daron Ruvi may receive if he is convicted. It changed the conversation about cyberbullying from being just a joke, a harmless prank, just people talking on Facebook or Twitter. Here's the real issue. When does your Facebooking or your tweeting cross the line into criminal behavior and no longer is just free speech? As Dr. Kathleen Heidi and I discussed here on the docket in January, kids and even some adults treat Facebook as a shield, allowing them to torture and silently bully people all from their laptop, their iPhones, their computers, wherever they may be. It's essentially the redefining of old-fashioned bullying at school, slamming a kid against a locker, beating him up after school. And it's not just about gay kids either. It can happen to anyone, as we've seen all over the country. The New York State Senate actually commissioned a cyberbullying study ahead of writing the new cyberbullying laws that they are waiting to pass up there. It defines cyberbullying as a phenomenon that is largely unique to teens and is a focused attack on one individual by many. They were careful to make the distinction between that and cyberstalking or just plain harassment. It all comes down to intent. With that information in hand, the question now becomes, what can the law do about it? As much as Facebook and Twitter can be an online itinerary of everything you say or you do, proving that you are the one posting those updates or messages is a whole other issue in a court of law. Most courts leave that question for a jury. But connecting up a suicide to a cyberbullying of a victim indoors, is another legal issue as well. Lawmakers must think very critically about that. I've often said knee-jerk legislation is not the way to go, and it's nothing more than a bad law waiting to be overturned by the courts. There are many constitutional issues, both criminal and in general, free speech, for example, that need to be balanced. The loss of a friend or a loved one by suicide is tortuous. It's an event that never goes away because the questions always remain. What could I have done to help him or her? Why didn't he say something about what was going on? These are some of the same questions Tyler Clementi's older brother is asking himself every day. He shared his story in Out magazine this month, and what's even harder is that Tyler's brother is also gay and thought Tyler was the one who could handle being out better than him. New Jersey prosecutors got it right, in my opinion, in charging Ravi the way that they did and not charging him with Tyler's death. I say that because there would be nothing worse than having Ravi convicted and held responsible for Tyler Clementi's death, only to have that case overturned. What little justice that was done for Tyler's brother and his family would be gone. The same philosophy applies going forward and writing laws to address this epidemic. And that is our first op-ed segment for On the Docket. Turning now to financial news, the markets here in the U.S. today finished mixed. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed up at 13,186, finally clearing that all-important 13,000 mark. The NASDAQ was also up over the 3,000 mark, again, record territory for the NASDAQ. Oil prices were down $1.12 to $105 a barrel. That's still very high, as we all know, and impacting us locally. National average for a gallon of gas up to $3.80. $4 is right around the corner, according to most experts. Time now for your On the Docket forecast. Winter is obviously gone. We turn the clocks ahead, and yep, it's summer already in the Bay Area. Highs will stay in the low 80s throughout the week, and no rain is expected, setting the stage for another great weekend at the beach or at the pool or on the beach, maybe with a peach daiquiri. And at 5:12, you are up to date for all the latest news. We want to hear from you throughout the hour. Post a message on our fan page at facebook.com/onthedocket. You can also follow me on Twitter at FelixVegaNews or send me an email, felixveganews@aol.com. You're listening to On the Docket live on hawkradio.com and WMNF Tampa 88.5 HD4. Now on to our topic of the week. As I mentioned, drawing the line on applying the death penalty. As we stated at the top of the hour, new law sitting on Governor Rick Scott's desk would add a new crime to the list of crimes already punishable by death in Florida. Yes, we're talking about the death penalty. That new law, aggravated fleeing and eluding resulting in death or serious bodily injury, would also be a death penalty offense. With all the budget wrangling that went on in Tallahassee last week, this was a law that emerged from a legislative session that took many in the legal community by surprise. A law resulting from the death of Deputy John Mecklenburg. It was only last July when Deputy Mecklenburg was involved in a pursuit that started in Hernando County. Michael James Anthony led deputies on a chase into Pasco County, where Mecklenburg lost control of a squad car after they tried to apprehend Anthony in what's called a pit maneuver or pursuit intervention technique. Mecklenburg crashed his car into a tree on US 41. Anthony continued fleeing from the police all the way into Hillsborough County and even across the Howard Franklin Bridge, still going the wrong way. Pinellas County deputies were finally able to stop Anthony when he crossed the bridge. Under that new law that's being proposed and sitting on the governor's desk right now, a pursuit ending in serious bodily injury or death will be the first driving-related charge added to the death penalty list. That list includes kidnapping, sexual battery, robbery, and a whole host of felonies, including first-degree murder. It's raising a lot of eyebrows because it's one of those situations where why is the death penalty going to apply to this case as opposed to other driving-related incidents? When I first showed this law to one of my friends this weekend, another attorney of mine that specializes in traffic homicide cases, she was admittedly shocked and was surprised at how the law became into effect, mainly because of the fact that it is a driving-related incident. Most of the other death penalty cases are centered around a robbery that goes wrong, a first-degree murder, and also there are certain circumstances that we as prosecutors consider. Is it heinous, atrocious, or cruel in the manner in which the person was killed? As a driving offense like reckless driving causing serious bodily injury or death does not require so much an intent element as some other crimes like premeditated murder. The other issue is whether or not it's going to withstand some constitutional scrutiny. A lot of defense attorneys will raise some issues because DUI manslaughter, for example, is not a death penalty case. In Florida, DUI manslaughter, much to the chagrin of many people and advocates, is only a second-degree felony. It's punishable by only 15 years in the Florida State Prison. If you leave the scene during a DUI manslaughter that involves a death, then you're facing a 30-year felony, a first-degree felony, if you will. So what sort of factors go into the decision to actually seek the death penalty? There's many that go into it. This would make this case automatically become a death penalty offense, which is what some legal experts are going to challenge in the courtroom and also before a trial even starts. It's also going to raise a lot of questions with advocates for against drunk driving, against traffic-related fatalities, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving as well. It's also going to raise issues with whether or not this crime was actually should be intended for consideration for a death penalty qualification. Because, as many people say, when I handle traffic homicide cases, why is this person not going to get more time in prison? It's the number one question that families often ask prosecutors, and it's one of those questions that we really don't have a good answer for. It's the legislature that enacts these laws. It's the legislature that decides what laws are going to be written, and in the end, it's ultimately up to them to pass the laws that we, in turn, prosecute. Having handled dozens of traffic homicide cases, my friend also pointed out that there are issues with making this a death penalty qualified offense. There will be another push, I think, from, like I said, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, other advocacy groups to sign new laws into effect that would punish DUI manslaughter offenses at a higher level. So one of those questions, one of those situations is definitely we're going to have to watch here on the docket. It's an interesting issue because it opens up a whole new argument for prosecutors and also for defense attorneys to challenge the death penalty in the end. One other story that I picked up on is regarding witness identification issues in court. We've heard a lot of stories lately in the media and also around the courthouse where witness identification, eyewitness identification, essentially what you do when you witness any sort of crime, has come under fire recently because of its reliability. Well, a new jury instruction that's being proposed and is pending review before the Florida Supreme Court would actually address a lot of these issues. And what it would essentially do is give a list of 9 factors to the jury to consider in any case where eyewitness identification came into play, which is going to be 90% of your criminal cases. For some of the issues that they want to consider is the circumstances under which the defendant was presented to the eyewitness for identification, any inconsistent identification made by the eyewitness, any instance in which the eyewitness did not make an identification when given the opportunity to do so. That's also a dangerous one because a lot of times, I can tell you as a prosecutor, these cases come to you and you don't have a firm suspect in mind or someone that is under investigation. We will show a photo pack, ID, a series of pictures to a witness or a victim, and they will not pick someone out of the photo pack because this person is simply not there. Some of these criteria are confusing, admittedly. Some of them may also create reasonable doubt, although we are allowed to consider reasonable doubt in a trial. Actually giving an instruction to the jury that may create reasonable doubt is a whole issue in and of itself. Defense attorneys have weighed in on this, I've talked to, and also prosecutors. It's an interesting story that's also going to be to watch. Also, another issue that came up, cross-race identification, is also come into play. For example, if a Caucasian victim identifies an African-American or Hispanic suspect, a lot of times there are studies that have been put forth before the courts saying that cross-race identification, as it's called, is inherently unreliable. This also gives, this instruction would make that a consideration that the jury will be able to consider without giving them any more real instruction on what that actually means. So there's a lot of factors that they are going to have to consider, also a lot of issues that are going to come up with that rule as well. So another interesting story that we will keep you up to date on here on the docket. And as we switch gears now to a story that we're going to talk about that's going to making headlines, actually just broke this afternoon and also throughout the morning. We're going to switch gears to our sports page now. Making headlines, we have to talk about first college hoops. California is facing USF tonight in the first round of the NCAA tournament. It's the first time USF has been in the tournament play in 20 years. The Bulls lost to Notre Dame last Thursday, but still pulled through for a selection spot. A win tonight would bring them into the Midwest Division as a number 12 seed and take on Temple on Friday. Then they would either face Michigan or Ohio if they win that game. Some breaking Bucks news today. Coach Greg Schiano and the Bucks management staff announced a number of high-value acquisitions in free agency, starting with we have Eric Wright, who was signed on for a 5-year deal for $37.5 million. Wide receiver Vince Jackson was was acquisition from the Chargers, another 5-year deal for $55.5 million, and also the highly anticipated guard Carl Nicks from New Orleans. He was signed for a 5-year, $47.5 million deal. At last check earlier this week, the Bucs were about $45 million under their salary cap, so definitely they went on a spending spree today. Whether or not they continue that spree for now or turn their attention to the draft, those are things that they are going to work out in the management. Also, another story that broke late this afternoon, Mike D'Antoni of the Knicks, the head coach there, has resigned in New York, and details are still emerging about that. Some other signing news in the NFL. Signing season's in full effect, but not so much for Peyton Manning yet. Super Bowl winning quarterback of the Colts was released from the team after sitting out last year, recovering from neck surgery. So far, he's met with several teams, including the Broncos and the Dolphins. News of that Broncos meeting caused quite a stir Saturday as Tim Tebow diehards rallied to disbelief that Broncos management would consider anyone but Tebow as their starting quarterback. Tebow sidestepped the rumors at a media event he held here in Tampa at the D1 Sports facility. He now co-owns with other athletes. No word yet on who Manning is favoring or how much teams are willing to pay to sign the veteran quarterback. On now to more of our scandals that we've been tracking since November. Jerry Sandusky. It seems like we can never do this show without bringing up Jerry Sandusky, even though we've been on a break for over a month now. Lawyers for the state and defense were in court on Monday, this time arguing over the release of additional information in the case. Defense attorney Joe Amendola asked the judge to order prosecutors to turn over more specific information about each alleged assault that Sandusky is charged with, including specific locations, dates, and names of any witnesses who may have information about those incidents. Prosecutors thus far have only released timelines and estimates as to when the assaults took place and have not identified two of the victims to date. Although victims in Florida's sexual battery cases are identified only by initials, prosecutors are required to turn over specifics as to each charge before proceeding to trial. Pennsylvania's laws differ in many respects from Florida's open discovery laws. We also saw that sharp parallel drawn during the initial court appearances in the case where no live feed or cameras were allowed in the courtroom. Interestingly enough, the court did allow reporters to blog or tweet about what was going on, as it was considered not to be live coverage. We'll continue to follow the latest on this story as it continues to wind towards a trial date later this year. On now to politics and the heated Republican primary. First up, a stunning victory by Rick Santorum last night, two of them actually, in Alabama and Mississippi in the primaries, and they renew concerns over Mitt Romney's electability and the fractured field of Republican candidates. Santorum won decisively in both states after early polling suggested it would be a close race between Romney, Santorum, and former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. In Alabama, the vote split 35% for Santorum, 29% for Gingrich and Romney, and 5% for Ron Paul. It was a tighter split in Mississippi, with Santorum walking away with 33% of the vote, Romney and Gingrich each with 31%, and Ron Paul getting just 4%. As the race grinds on, what is Mitt Romney supposed to do? Pundits and critics, Republican and Democratic alike, have argued that he simply cannot connect with voters on a number of issues, although he retains his title of most electable to beat Barack Obama. Romney seems to do well in more moderate sectors of the electorate. Take, for example, his home state of Michigan, where he barely beat Rick Santorum, mostly because of large population centers that are more moderate voters. Look at any of the maps on CNN and every election night so far, and you see a lot of purple filling in on those maps. Of course, purple is Santorum's official CNN color. Never thought we would assign colors to people for their election or their electability, but it's been done. It's the core base of the Republican Party, and those evangelical Christians that keep propping up the Santorum campaign based on social value issues, mainly gay marriage and contraception. Those have sidetracked the national conversation on the economy and also on jobs. Most exit polls since the beginning of the primary season, from Iowa to New Hampshire to Florida and even Alabama and Mississippi, show that people are more concerned with those two issues than any other issue, which should be Romney's selling point. NBC News exit polls last night again supported that argument, but in the end, values won out over practicality, despite the chief goal of the Republican base being to beat President Barack Obama in November, as has been openly stated. advantage Obama in that regard because if the GOP doesn't unite around one candidate soon, you can expect many Republicans not to show up at the polls in November if their candidate is not the nominee. Again, exit polls are a wonderful thing. The Hillary-Obama analogy doesn't hold water in the GOP race either. Remember June of 2008 when Hillary Clinton finally conceded the nomination to Barack Obama, as became clear she could not get the delegates she needed to beat him, although it was virtually a dead heat until the end. The difference between the Hillary-Obama situation and the Romney-Santorum-Gingrich-Paul four-way is that Democrats would have been happy with either President Obama or Hillary Clinton as the nominee. Not the case now with Republicans. Republicans also bear some of the blame for this election cycle, as the GOP suggested most states move to a proportional delegate count as opposed to winner-take-all, allowing Santorum and Gingrich to siphon away delegates with each passing state. The magic number, of course, for the delegate count, 1,144. After last night, it's tightened up a lot between Romney and Santorum, 495 to 252. One other footnote to yesterday's primaries in the South, the shocking number of Americans who still believe President Obama is a Muslim or of some unknown religion. 600 likely GOP voters were asked by public policy polling that very question, and 45% responded that he was a Muslim. 41% said they were uncertain. A similar poll conducted in Mississippi of 656 likely GOP voters found 52% thought Obama was a Muslim, 36% said they weren't sure, and only 12% took the president at his word of being a Christian. Ironically, it's the one thing Romney and Obama have in common, a religious disconnect with Republicans. So much for separation of church and state. Well, with that, we want to remind you that you can listen to us live online every Wednesday at 5 p.m. at hawkradio.com and also WMNF.org. Just click on the HD4 link. Once you get there, coming up on 5:30, the bottom of the hour, we'll also post a link to our entire show on our fan page, facebook.com/onthedocket, later tonight as well. You're listening to On the Docket, the new legal authority of news radio. In our On the Docket file drawer tonight, a few stories that you need to know this week. First up, an article in the Capital New York magazine caught my eye as an up-and-coming journalist. The journalism world lost a true veteran war correspondent on February 23rd, when Sunday Times reporter Marie Colvin was killed in an ambush on a media compound in Syria. Since the uprising began last March, and we have reported here on the docket, 7,500 people have been killed in Syria. Among them, 9 journalists, including Colvin and photographer Remy Ochlik, who was with Colvin during the attack in Syria in February. Syria refuses to grant media access to the region in what can only be construed as a calculated decision to hide what is going on inside the country. A few reporters like CNN's Arwa Damon have managed to get into Syria and report, but most news outlets are keeping their distance and their correspondents' distance, staging instead near Beirut. Every true correspondent's dream is to get into the danger zone, shoot as much video, talk to as many people as they can, and turn the story safely. The end aim is not necessarily ratings or an award, but instead exposing the reality of a region in conflict with the hopes that change will come, and all those lives lost would not be in vain. Marie Colvin died not only doing what she loved, but also what she believed in. It's her dedication to the plight of the Syrian people and telling their story that inspires journalists like myself. It also reminds us of how dangerous some assignments can be and the risk journalists take in covering stories like Syria because they simply care. Controversial voter ID laws were a hot topic Monday in Wisconsin and Texas, as the Supreme Courts in both states declared the laws unconstitutional. Both laws and similar laws in other states have come under fire as being a form of voter suppression. The argument goes like this. Anyone who wants to vote in Texas or Wisconsin, or for that matter, Florida, would be required to produce a photo ID at the polls. Doesn't seem that bad on its face, but opponents accuse states that enact such laws without there being some showing of voter fraud are engaging in what's called voter suppression. What exactly does that mean? Essentially that minorities such as Hispanics and African Americans are less likely to have a driver's license or a photo ID. Judges in Wisconsin pointed to Article 3 of the state constitution to support their decision, claiming the Constitution is clear that any U.S. citizen 18 years of age or older can vote. Adding the photo ID rule would effectively infringe on that right. Wisconsin's Governor Scott Walker and Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen, both Republicans, feel the photo ID is a common-sense approach to protect the integrity of the elections in Wisconsin. That's a direct quote from the governor. This whole debate made me think about voting in Florida. I registered to vote when I was 18, and I voted in almost every election possible. I would bring my registration card, my ID. Now we can vote just with our photo IDs. We live in a diverse state with people of all races and nationalities that are U.S. and Florida citizens. So where is the challenge to Florida's voting law? Or are these arguments more political than they are constitutional, as we've seen play out in Texas and Wisconsin? In Texas, the U.S. Justice Department states that many Hispanic voters lack state-issued IDs, according to one Huffington Post article that I read. And shouldn't the follow-up question be, how many of those people would actually go vote? Also, how many of those people without IDs are not eligible to vote at all? That's another question being asked. Whether or not they are a convicted felon, whether or not they are a U.S. citizen at all, just to name a couple. Or better yet, look at the millions of Americans 18 years of age or older that voted in the 2008 election and elected our first African-American president. We just want to get our cases documented properly before they go back and are on the docket file drawer this week. And now in our last segment tonight, you can't make this stuff up. We see amazing and unusual stories in court every day as prosecutors, and it never surprises me every week when I write this segment that there is no end to the legal insanity that goes on around the world, good, bad, and just plain strange. We have it all again this week on the docket. The story that keeps on giving was back in the news this week. Of course, I'm talking about Casey Anthony. Since our last show, the legal showdown between Anthony and Zanny the Nanny has heated up once again. Anthony's legal team tried to block Casey Anthony's deposition unsuccessfully. Then came along the long-awaited motion for summary judgment, or motion to dismiss the lawsuit. I've said all along there's no case because fictional Zanny the Nanny that lived inside Casey Anthony's head was not the same Zenaida Gonzalez that has famously filed suit against her, with her attorney John Morgan by her side. Well, now it appears that the case is headed to trial next month. Yes, folks, Casey Anthony Part 2, Casey Anthony Redux, Casey, the sequel. In an unusual move, Morgan wants to now subpoena Casey Anthony to make sure she shows up for the trial. John Morgan argued to Judge Lisa Munyon Monday that they would need Casey Anthony's address in order to do so. Not so fast, said the judge. Munyon ruled that Casey can be served with a subpoena through her attorneys. Citing security concerns, Casey's attorneys don't think she will even attend her trial. Get ready for a contempt hearing, everyone, because God knows where Casey is, but you can imagine a SWAT team forcibly removing her from her hideout to come to Orlando and face Zanny the Nanny, who really isn't Zanny the Nanny Casey was talking about to begin with. True TV better clear their calendar, people. Both sides have asked for a continuance in the case to argue the summary judgment motion. The suspense of it all. I can't wait. Everyone's already tweeting about it, probably. Now, if you have kids, the thought of sending your son or daughter to boarding school or a military academy may have crossed your mind at some point, especially on those days when they've gotten in 3 fights at school, that day they tracked mud across your brand new carpet. But no matter how bad the little ones behave, you might want to think twice about sending them to the St. John's Military School in Salina, Kansas. Because at St. John's, they have an admittedly different approach to setting your kids straight. Through the other kids at the school are called disciplinarians. That's right, the students disciplining other students. Well, it is military school, so maybe it's kind of like ROTC, right? Not so much. According to the HuffingtonPost.com, the parents of 4 students have sued the school and a branch of the Episcopal Church over incidents like the following: locking a student in a locker, making him roll around in the mud, then urinating on him in the shower. Or how about another student being beaten so badly his orbital socket was fractured and he lost sight in that eye? Or how about the suicide attempts that have been reported at the school because they simply don't want to face the discipline every day and also, quite frankly, torture? School officials have called one incident where 2 janitors, they even got in on the act, where 2 janitors bound and gagged students. They called it a practical joke gone bad. Really? I'm certainly not laughing at neither of those parents or those kids. Next time Junior acts up, just take away his allowance or something. Anything but the St. John's Military School in Salina, Kansas. And finally tonight, most of us have made some bad calls after a night of drinking. Bad hookups, drunk dialing, drunk texting, getting in a fight, falling onto a concrete dock, getting off a boat. You know the drill. How about drag racing and crashing into a police car? Sounds like a really bad idea, right? Well, not the case with 4 Amish kids in the town of Sherman, New York. Okay, so the story sounds like one of those a priest, a rabbi, and a hooker walk into a bar jokes, but we are about accurate reporting on this show, so here goes this story. So these 4 Amish kids, ages 18 to 20, climb into their horse-drawn carriages and decide to race each other up and down the streets of Sherman, New York. Well, the largely Amish town folk didn't take too kindly to this horse and carriage drag race, and they ended up calling the police. When the cops arrived, it was curtains for our drag racers as one of the buggies flipped over as a squad car pulled in front of it. No horses were injured, although one did break free after the crash and ran to a barn. I'm guessing the kids would have liked to do the same if they weren't so drunk. And that, my friends, is another example of why you can't make this stuff up. So, as I said, we are glad to be back on the air this Wednesday night. We're going to cut the show a little short tonight at about 5:36, but next week we're going to be back for another full hour. We've got a lot of great stories, and also our On the Docket add-on series. We're going to start up again real soon with some great stories I have lined up, not only about cyberbullying, but also issues involving the domestic partner registry here in Tampa that's taking shape, and also some issues on some other stories that we've been following while we've been off the air that I've been lining up on the side as well. Again, I appreciate everyone's response in making the show a success. It was a dream come true for me to start this, and hopefully we'll continue bringing you intelligent, fun, and informative radio over the rest of the year and into the future. So that's going to do it for me. Live from our broadcast center in Ybor City, you're listening to On the Docket on hawkradio.com and WMNF 88.5 HD4. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/onthedocket. With that, we'll see you next week.